Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times, a Prancing Pony podcast production. I'm the Man of the West. Let's go ahead and keep week 76 going with another Word Nerd Wednesday. Now, having introduced that entirely new segment last week with Túrin Tuesdays, I'm using these Word Nerd Wednesdays to look at some of the new names and words that we encounter in those readings. Now, last week we looked at the names of the brothers Húrin and Húor, the battle where their heroism essentially saved Middle-earth, the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, and Húrin's famous cry, Aure and Tuliva. Today we're going to look at some of the names that we encountered in yesterday's reading of the story of Túrin, the realm where Húrin was lord, his wife Morwen, their daughter Lalaith, and their other daughter Nienor. Húrin was lord of Dor-lómin. Now this was a land in the southwestern part of Hithlum. It was to the northeast of Nevrast and to the west of Mithrim. The name Dor-lómin is a Sindarin name, and it means land of echoes. Dor, of course, meaning land, like we see in Gondor, Mordor, Doriath. And then Lómin, which means echoing. And we see that in the mountains that border this land. They're called the Ered Lómin, the echoing mountains. The Lom part of that word is from the same root Lam that we see in the Lamoth, the valley where Ungoliant and Morgoth had their little spat. That name means great echo. Lam and Lom from the same root, which means echo. Húrin is married to Morwen. Now, her name, which is shared with Morwen Steelsheen, the wife of King Thengel and the mother of King Theoden, is Sindarin for dark maiden. You undoubtedly recognize the Mor element, meaning dark or darkness. We see that in Mordor, Morannon, and so on. And we've done enough of these Word Nerd Wednesdays that you might even recognize the suffix, the lenited form of Gwen. That means maiden. We see it in Arwen's name, for example. Now, she was often referred to, not Arwen, but Morwen, as Morwen Elethwen. Now, that epithet, Elethwen, means elf-sheen, according to the Silmarillion. But in letter 211, Tolkien, in explaining about the El prefix, explains that it remained in some proper names as Elethwen, elven fair. Her name was changed over the years. In original draft notes, she was Tiranne, then by the Lost Tales themselves, Mavwin. By Lays of Beleriand, she was Morwyn, and then Morwen by the 1930s Silmarillion drafts. Now, we'll get to Túrin's many names when they come along in the story, right? All of his names are going to take a whole Wednesday or two just to get through. So instead, we'll move to their next child, the daughter who was called Lalaith, which is laughter. Lalaith is indeed a Sindarin noun that means laughter, but that wasn't her given name. In the full version of the story found in the Children of Húrin, we learn that Lalaith's birth name was Urwen. Now that's a Sindarin name, of course. It has that same Gwen element, which as a suffix is lenited to Wen. Now while the name Urwen was never glossed, given that the first part of her name is Ur, which means fire or heat, she seems to have been named Fire Maiden, or something along those lines. Makes me wonder if she was a redhead. Finally, their third child, born after Húrin was captured and Túrin sent to live in Doriath, a daughter that Morwen named Nienor, which the text tells us right away means morning. Not morning as opposed to evening, for those of you just listening, but mourning, as in Morwen is mourning Húrin's death and likely Lalaith's death as well. The initial element in her name is likely related to Ni, meaning tear. That's an element we see in the name of the Valier Nienna, and it's cognate with the word that we looked at last week, Nirnaeth. Now, even the name that she's going to have much, much later in the story, Niniel, draws on the same element for tear. That name means tear maiden. Now, it turns out we have time for one more word this week, so let's go back to Húrin, who was Lord of Dor-lómin because he was the chief of the house of Hador. Now, in a 1959 genealogy found in the War of the Jewels, Tolkien translated the name of Hador Lorindal as the warrior Goldenhead. So Hador could be warrior. However, the origin of the word Hador, if not the name Hador, shows that it means thrower of spears or darts, from a root that means hurl, cast, send through air, loose from hand. And in that genealogy, the name of Hador Lorindal appears beneath Sindarin names Magor, meaning the sword, and Hathal, the axe. So perhaps it means more than just warrior, but javelin warrior or something like that. His epithet, Lorindal, is the lenited form of Glorindal, a Sindarin word meaning golden head, from glaur, meaning golden, we see that also in Glorfindel, and Dol meaning head, usually seen in the names of hills or mountains as a metaphor, like Dol Amroth. And that's it, folks, for today's Word Nerd Wednesday. But come back next week as we wander the wide, wild, wonderful world of words weekly on Wednesdays. And if there is a word you want to know more about, just let me know. Email barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com. And please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, a monthly hangout with me, bonus weekly episode, and a lot more. And everybody, please join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Third Age Thursday. Podcast listeners, please be sure to subscribe to the TTT in your podcast apps. Maybe throw a rating and review in there as well. For those on YouTube, please like this video and then subscribe to the channel so that you get all the PPP productions, including, eventually, all seasons of the PPP, the Rings of Power Wrap-Up, every episode of this show, and my new streaming project, The PPP Plays. And be sure you're following @PrancingPonyPod on Blue Sky, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and simply the Prancing Pony Podcast on Facebook. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.